Hello, it's Charlotte's sister C. Farrell, host of Powered by Age, Canada's longest-running senior-led podcast that invites you to do what you love.
This podcast is for you if you love writing or telling stories, if you love sharing poetry or doing interviews.
This podcast is for you if you love working on ways to create age-friendly cities.
This podcast is for you if you love learning how to tame technology and get more out of virtual events, if you love finding more ways to share your heritage or traditions.
If you love any of these things, you can go beyond listening and join our weekly podcast group. Simply email pbaafc@gmail.com and put your name in the subject line. Powered by Age is sponsored by the Government of Canada, New Horizons Grant, the 411 Senior Center Society, and G&F Financial Group. Hello and welcome to Powered by Age. I'm Charlotte Farrell, coordinator and host, and I want you to know today we're going to be, again, recognizing Indigenous Peoples Month, as well as last week we talked about how far we've come with 20 different things we wanted to do to change the perception of older people. And this week, people were going to bring examples of ways that they want to change through stories or other items that you'll be hearing. But I want to first acknowledge that our work takes place on the unceded lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, which means they do not give it to us, and at some point there will have to be a reconciliation of those lands to their ancestral rights. I want to acknowledge that our podcast program is sponsored by the Government of Canada, New Horizons Grant, the 411 Senior Society, and the GF Financial Group. We're very thankful for their recognition of the importance of seniors' voices being heard. Now I'm going to invite Nancy to invite someone she's been talking about around this effort to change the perception of seniors. And then before she gets into that, we're going to do something else that we talked about going forward. We want to do movement. We want to include movement because people have talked about sitting as the new smoking, and sitting for a long period of time is particularly not good for us as we, including me, grow older. So Jessie is going to play a piece of music that is from an Indigenous musician here in Canada. So Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I live on Vancouver Island in beautiful Nanaimo. And I noticed a sign yesterday, parking in the parking lot in the plaza. And the sign, and you know how they have the different signs now for families, babies. There's always been signs for, disabled parking, that sort of thing. But this sign said seniors 55 plus parking. It didn't settle so well with me. It was just a real disconnect for me. And so I was curious about the image of that. I was curious about what other people's feelings would be about that. I took a picture of it, actually. I posted it on my social media on Facebook just to get some responses. And some people responded like, yeah, because we get, discounts. And other people said, well, that's the good thing that, that we're at that point. But the person that made that comment is, in their 70s. The 55 and parking spot closest, because then I started digesting it a little bit, processing a little bit, and I thought, well, if it was an issue about physical ability to be able to walk comfortably a shorter distance, then, that could potentially fall under the category of disabled parking, right? So I'm processing my feelings and my reaction to a parking sign to have a spot closest to the building that said 55 plus.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
The issue around the disability parking is you have to have a decal And in order to have a decal, you have to apply to Spark to get the decal.
Mm-hmm.
So while it's true that there's the parking spaces set aside for people with disabilities, if someone doesn't have a disability that you can actually get a decal for, then they're SOL. So, I think there is that other piece to it, that there are people who are older who don't have a decal, but who need to be, and for whom it would be better to be able to park closer.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The other reason too, 55 plus is a more digestible or acceptable way of saying older people. Several agencies, the federal government, provincial government, our station, other stations, people have said they don't want to be called seniors, don't want to be called golden agers. I don't like the picture that they have, the icon for a disabled person is someone who's bent over on a cane. Well, many people, as Chris said, have hidden disabilities. Mm-hmm. I escort somebody who has a pacemaker that looks, is fitted as a fiddle, but she has a pacemaker and cannot walk long distances. So when it's just that sign, visible sign of a wheelchair or a cane or somebody, bent over to their disability, then it gets other people shaming or saying, you don't belong here. So I think that age just, it takes some things out of the argument, and as well, doesn't make a person have to go to a doctor, get a doctor certified, they can have a decal, put people at risk of a penalty if you don't have that certification in your glove compartment at the time a policeman challenges you about the space.
True enough.
I don't know. What do you think, Diane?
It's all subjective. I don't think anything about it. It's subjective. And so I was thankful when my husband was sick and had a hard time walking, but he didn't want to get a little tag, right, for the car. So I thought, 55 plus, we can use that. And so other than that, I haven't noticed, I don't pay attention to oldie stuff. But I like to be recognized as a sage with wisdom and those kind of things. As far as infirmities or illnesses, I do my very best to take good care of my health. And I that's what I do. And prevention to me is everything. Some things you can't avoid, but some things you really can. And I've dealt with back issues. And I still never sought a tag because of my back injury, because I don't want to pull myself into that being disabled, even though that's what happened. Having my mind wrapped around me being disabled, it doesn't flow with my energy.
Right.
Even though I've had the injury that says I was, I still could not accept it, so I'm in that kind of conflict state where so-and-so says you're disabled, the doctor says you are, but in my mind, I'm not.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I think that's why some people too didn't respond to the city's invitation to be in a conversation about this as disabled people rather than as just people who are challenged or people who have opinions about the transportation system or about accessibility. But speaking of movement, another thing that we are working on building into our podcast is doing some movement to music, because sitting is called the new smoking because of so many ways it affects the health. So however you move, you can move in a chair, you can move your hands, and you can also move and think, because this particular piece of music is from a local Indigenous musician, and we are thinking about the words, how words and music can also help us to identify with the heritage and history.
So this is going to be the local artist Nimkish, who is from here in Vancouver, in unceded Coast Salish territory. and her song YSB, which stands for Young, Sick, Broke.
Reflection of you, reflection of me. Is this what it's like to be a brick in the wall? If there's no freedom for you, then there's no freedom at all. Is this what it's like to abolish our egos, bask in the light, use our bodies to veto? The light in the mood, but don't patch up the darkness, mind distorted and skewed. Renewed by my senses, but don't know what to do. Running low on my ink, but at least I'm with you. Young, sick, broke, I need healing. I got issues stacked to the ceiling. I need healing, I need freedom. Young, sick, broke, yeah, I need it. Young, sick, broke, I need healing. I got issues stacked to the ceiling. I need healing, I need freedom. Young, sick, broke, yeah, I need it. Born, love, age, fight, war, breed, wealth, rights, safe, sound. Long nights, work, taxi stand, life, worth, law, age, fight, war, breed, wealth, rights, safe, sound, long nights, work, taxi stand, life. Young, sick, broke, I need healing. I got issues stacked to the ceiling. I need healing, I need freedom. Young, sick, broke, yeah, I need it. Young, sick, broke, I need healing. I got issues stacked to the ceiling. I need healing, I need freedom. Young, sick, broke, yeah, I need it.
Wow, thank you, Jesse. That's one of the things that they've been praying. Some people who have been in residential schools and talking about the healing that still needs to occur, the flashbacks some people have had. There was a man on Czechs or Global TV that they were going to interview, and as he started, and he was maybe in his 60s to 70s, but as he started to talk about it, he said he had so many horrible flashbacks, he just couldn't go on. But I think moving to the music, each time I was thinking young, sick, and broke. That's one of the, how do you associate that with as a message from an Indigenous young woman? I mean, do you see an association? There's been a lot of conversation around foster care is the new residential schools, that kids are put into foster care and then emancipated out of it at 18, but without a job, without money, without anything to help them, get started in adult life.
I think there's a real connection to the idea of intergenerational trauma and the idea that, to remember that a lot of what she is speaking about and what, the conversation around residential schools and the Indigenous peoples of Canada, like a lot of what is being discussed is still ongoing. And even if it's not currently ongoing, the effects of what has happened in the past still have present day ramifications. And they still affect the day-to-day life of the people who are descended from those who might have been in residential schools or otherwise interacted with sort of the colonialism of the Canadian state.
I was thinking something very similar. And one of the other things that I read recently, I don't remember where, but that because there's these stereotypes that exist. I'm thinking of Vancouver and the downtown east side, and the fact that so many people are of First Nations, and that to remember that this is part of the part of the experience of the whole residential schools and the taking of culture and the attempt at destruction. Well, not just the attempt, but the destroying of a people. And so while we see people, I see people. I used to work in the downtown east side, so I'm very familiar with the environment there, and also very familiar with the fact that for most of these people are there because of trauma. That's how they end up there, and that the trauma is definitely linked to or can't be separated from the impact of colonialism.
I think, too, when reporters were looking for people to talk to, it said a lot of the people were homeless. This particular man that they were going to interview said he's living on the streets because he had been separated from his family. He went to the schools, but then afterwards, there was never anything given him to help him, build a foundation. So he was saying, the thought of being on a land that is, everybody in all their meetings, acknowledge it's unceded land, but there's nothing of the landholder's rights, just sleeping on the street. I think it's just unconscionable. And this is what some people in their call to action is, that we should really look at the relationship between homelessness, alcoholism, drug use, and having been robbed of attachment to a family and robbed from attachment to one's culture, and the society giving you the means to live or to get a job or to own property and not have to be homeless.
A friend of mine told me recently that someone that he knew had bought a place. I don't know whether it was a condo or a house, whatever. And what he did was to trace back the land titles until he actually got all the way back to the land title of whatever the First Nations group was that actually had title to the land that his home was built on. I thought that was very interesting. And I thought, oh my God, I'm sitting on a piece of somebody else's property as well, right? And I think one of the things for me is that also, thinking about land and possession and housing, that my understanding is that for First Nations people, it's not a question of individuals owning land. It's like, this is the land we have and this is the land we share. And so in many ways, that makes the fact that many First Nations people are homeless even worse, because they are on land, shared land that's their shared land, that they've been generous enough to share with us, but we've kind of taken huge advantage of our power and where we are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, in our neighborhood, real estate agents are tripping over themselves trying to get people to sell their properties. And they made a sheet, a flyer, and it listed, between Main Street and Fraser, the average price of homes had gone from up to $1,800,000 as the median price. And these are places that they don't have a swimming pool in the back. They don't have a circular drive. But that's all across Vancouver and then over into the islands. The price has gone up more than 30%. And so how will they ever get to the point of getting back to reconciliation of the land with the people when there are people who will now say, well, I have $2 million in this piece of real estate or this piece of property. What do you think will happen with reconciliation or people's idea toward reconciliation when there's this artificial idea that, you own this piece that has risen, in value so much? How do you think that would be reconciled, Nancy?
I don't know at this moment. I don't have any comments that come to mind really. I'm just digesting what you were sharing.
It's hard, and it's a question that has not been answered, right? That is the process of reconciliation, is how do we get from where we are currently, where there is this idea of private land ownership. And, as you mentioned, Chris, you can trace that land ownership all the way back to the original Indigenous people who inhabited the land. And at the time of colonization, the British government just said, hey, if you're a white man who can read and write, you are entitled to 300 acres of land, and that's just yours. And so there's the sort of contradiction between sort of the idea of Indigenous peoples having their shared land with the colonists, the settlers, and the current situation where almost all land is owned by settlers of some form, whether their families have been in Canada for 200 years or 5. Like, most land in this part of the world is owned by not Indigenous people. And so to reconcile those two is a very difficult conversation, because it means dealing with some, to put it extremely lightly, like historical unpleasantness, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of bad in there, and that's why it's reconciliation. It's not simple. It's not just accepting that, like, the blue is blue or whatever. There are some actual, like, pretty strongly rooted perspectives that need to be negotiated.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree. It's a very, very complicated and very long-standing challenge. However, in terms of thinking about reconciliation, one of the things that I think there are many other, I wouldn't say smaller, but many other more things that are more easily fixed. Just the fact that so many folks who live on reserves don't have clean water. Mm-hmm. So, that is something that, from my perspective, is easily fixable. So, I think somehow what might work for us is to look at smaller things that might be a possibility of actually changing. I mean, one of the things that happened this week is that the chiefs of 3 of the nations have stood up and said, we're taking ownership of this piece of the forestry. And so the protests that have been happening for the last number of weeks and months around this, the cutting down of the old growth forests here on Vancouver Island has actually begun to shift the conversation. So instead of it being the BC government and the companies that do the chopping down and that get the results, we've now have a situation where these 3 chiefs have stood up and said, no, this is our land, this is our resource, and we need to be part of managing that resource. And so suddenly the work on that and that part of the forest has stopped. So there's now a 2-year moratorium on the cutting down of those old growth trees. until the government and the First Nations people work out a reasonable, sustainable plan. So I think in some ways the issue of land and who owns it and all that kind of stuff is a huge one to tackle. And on the other hand, there are these smaller ways in which and stuff that's written in the report from that's written in the actual reconciliation report that actually can be done and haven't been done.
I think, when we were talking about the notion of older people, one of the negative notions people identified a few months ago is of being apathetic. However, when they were showing the people being arrested, one of the people that was arrested was an 80 or 90-year-old woman who was standing up and saying, well, you can take me to jail. She made them look shameful with, roughly handling her, but she was not apathetic in the least. Many of the people were older people and then the chiefs. So I think people recognizing that there is some wisdom, there's some experience in the activists with learning, as you stated, what is this reconciliation about? Intergenerational transfer of information so that people aren't just protesting without understanding a platform or protesting without understanding the history, but really seeing what there is within this act and that people have the experience. I think resiliency is one of the other characteristics of people 55 and older that we've identified as people involved in this podcast. And that often the picture that was shown during COVID of older people was somebody looking out the window and just looking sad, or someone who was bedridden, rather than that there have been people in each of the demonstrations that have happened, the hatred, the violence, marches or demonstrations to end the violence happening to Black people, East Indian, people of other faiths. What just happened last week with family being mowed down because of they were Muslim and because of their Islamic practice. The people have been uniting around those things, and you see older people within the groups. Older people are not just standing back. Older people are very much involved in being supportive and calling for people to join forces, to not just each group be isolated, but our reconciling and our working with and uniting with the Indigenous people, I think, is one way of getting to the bottom of it, because it makes people feel like, well, it's not just about you all, or it's just a long time ago, that this is something that is important to school children as well as to older people. Okay, now moving into more that idea of this week, we were going to be showing some examples of ways that people are getting to know people and know about members of our group who are writers, and also the stories they tell about the other generation. Diane Babcock is here and is going to be sharing her story, but she's going to tell us about the story she's telling, tell us about her process.
Yeah, I'm in Nanaimo, and I'm a writer of lots of different genres. But what I wanted to do for my family, and I don't know that actually that this particular broadcast today is a good time to do this, but so maybe I'll save it for another day. But what I was going to say is what I did with my aunt, who is 97, and she's the youngest of 12 children and the last of my father's side. I asked her to tell the stories of the family, what it was like growing up with my grandmother and grandfather, who I never knew very well at all. And my grandfather died when my dad was 6 months old. And so it left her with 11 children to raise by herself. And so that's what it was about, but there's no time to talk about that now. I just wanted to say that there's stories, and in reporting stories like I did with my aunt, to give it to the family, to pass it on, that we can give these stories because she has a good memory. And so I took a tape recorder, a voice recorder, and I said, I'd asked her questions about grandmother and what it was like growing up. And she just kept telling story after story and what it was like. And so we get to be very, very close to, I get to be very close to my grandparents through the stories that my aunt told me. And then at the same time, I get to be very close to my great-grandparents because I have my great-grandmother's memoirs and my great-grandfather's poetry from, it's over 100 years old now, but telling what life was like as Canadian pioneers. So those kind of things is like what I like to collect and be able to give to the family is those stories and being able to say, this is what my grandma was like. Just strong, very strong. And it's amazing what she did, raising 11 children by herself, with the eldest one being 18 and the youngest one being my dad at 6 months old. So, and the way she, took back her children when the welfare wanted to take them all away and adopt them all out. And she said no, and just the people that helped her out and how she did it, how she actually did take care of those kids and the fact that they had 12 together. If my grandfather hadn't passed, they likely would have had more,
Those are important stories to harvest, and an important thing to encourage other people to do, because sometimes people say kids aren't interested, but I found when I've told young kids in our family stories about my grandmother, they're listening and they're excited, and it's an important thing to carry forth. So are your stories, do you have individual stories, or is there one of the stories? Is it a collection of stories?
Actually, what this is, it's more of a bit of a biography about my grandmother and how she worked within, how she did it, how she, the fact that she made the clothes, the fact that she never got sick because she had the sicknesses when she was a child, even though many of her children were sick and grandfather was sick, she never got sick. She was always there taking care of the household. Always. Mm-hmm. And she knew how to do it. Like 12 kids, and the youngest, one of them died very young. And so that was very heartbreaking, I'm sure. But, just to carry that sense of, that hardiness, that she had. And sometimes I feel she's, watching over me and watching over all of us, because I can kind of feel her strength sometimes when, I need to, get things done. And I don't ever feel, if I want to complain about something, I just think about her and I'm going, I have no right to complain. And I don't complain usually, but I don't think other people should complain so much as they do. That's for sure. When you have examples like that in the world, that's inspiring. It shows how resilient we are as human beings.
Yeah, and I think also the respect for older people, a thing that has shifted with people moving about so much is sometimes they don't bring their family members along. And so you have generations that grew up without having any connection to an older person, and their values are things that people, we always did it this way, or these are the ways, these are the values, like saving money or different things. I think it's really good that you have, collected this as something that you can read and share. So is it organized in chapters? What is the way that you have organized
This
your book?
particular, as a presentation, just in bullet points. I have
Mhm.
2 pages of bullet points, plus photos of the house that grandfather built. And then, it's a story in bullet points because, each point is an aspect of it. It just gives a little image into what their life was like, when it comes to putting everything into a short period of time. Bullet points help a lot. It's not into a story at this point.
Mhm.
It was just in bullet points to create a short presentation for today is how it was going to be presented.
Okay, and so what's the length of the presentation?
2 pages of bullet points right here. And some pictures.
So we haven't timed it. You know what we've been working with, because Chris has also told a story, and we've been at the beginning when we first shifted from meetings at the 411 Center to meeting online. One of the first things people shared different stories, and so we found when a story goes past 8 minutes, it gets long for people who are listening. So we're looking at ways of telling stories, and our podcast creation meetings are a good way sometimes for a person to get feedback and to see. We have 3 musicians within our group. Are there ways of putting music in? Are there ways of putting tones in? What are some of the ways that you can enhance a long story that someone has? You take a break. We're all of an era where you used to go to the movies and they would come to a point and they'd say it'll be continued in 2 weeks. You would see something and then music would play and you'd come back in 2 weeks and you get the rest of the story. So we're looking at how we can do that about stories people tell, because the stories are valuable, but we also live in an age where especially from the 60s over into the 60s, people were socialized to have things change every 4 seconds. At the retirement age, I went back to school, to film school, and I had an instructor that told me you can't hold on to an image for longer than 4 seconds. Every 4 seconds, and maybe watch a program and count every time the camera changed, and it literally was at 4 seconds, it changes either to something. But also with listening, it's encouraging that a lot of people are subscribing. Podcasts are one of the things a lot of older people as well as young people are subscribing. So people are interested, but it's just looking at what can we do? So it would be good if we had the first page of your bullet points just to hear how it flows, so that we could look at ways. The other thing that we do is sometimes stories, like Chris had a story that she told within the podcast, but then recorded it separately so that it's on our website in the thing that's called spins. Those are stories, poems, interviews, and novelties. So we have 2 of the people that are part of our production group are also producers and creative artists, people working with the radio station CJSF, so that on a different day from our podcast, when people get individualized help, some of that is around things like inflection, speed, tones, what other things can you do, so that stories that you have that are valuable can be recorded and presented to people in a way that, holds or sparks their attention. So would you feel comfortable sharing what you have in your first bullet point?
Well, yeah, I actually have a few bullet points in different sections, like her, she was born in 1889 in Port Elgin, Ontario. She was married to George Wellington Babcock in 1913 in Regina, and they moved to Courtenay. And he was a welder and a boiler maker for Comox Logging. So they lived in one of the Comox Logging houses until he built a house himself. And he built it it was a log house with vertical logs rather than horizontal logs. And so she was only 4'11", and that's her shoe.
Wow.
She's a 2.5. This is my shoe, 7.5. See, so that's the other show and tell part that I was going to show you guys. And like I said, she never got sick because she had all the illnesses like the scarlet fever, the measles, and all those things kids brought home because there was like 11 kids, right? Grandfather always got them. He always got sick, but she never did because she had them when she was younger, and her mother went through the same thing. She was always the strong one that never got sick when the kids did. Every night, my aunt relays, she'd be nursing a baby or giving a bottle. She used to hum and sing a lot. She played the mouth organ. She couldn't swim, so she didn't teach them. Grandfather did that. She would look in a catalog and the kids would pick out what they want. She would buy the material and make it. And she would do that for everything, absolutely everything. And for all the kids. And she would help the teacher make costumes as well. After when they were building the house, he would go after work and go the 4 miles and build the house and come home. She would go up and help him with digging the well. And this is on top of everything else, right, that they were doing. And on the last day of school in 33 is when they moved into the house. And then it was 2 weeks later, grandfather was thinking he could get more water from the well. So he was pulling away at the rocks and he got a chill and got pneumonia. And then he died then. So after that, she, like I said, the welfare came and wanted to take all the kids. Kids scattered as soon as they saw her car come, social worker's car come, but she would not let them take any of the children. So they paid her $60 a month to take care of them. And one kid moved away. They would take $5 away from her. But she had a cow and the chickens, and the older ones could help out. When some of them turned like 14, they would go away and work and send money home. Then the house burnt down and she moved into Courtney and she was known as Courtney Grandma. And then, so I only met her once when I was about 3. She died when I was 3. So I just remember meeting her once for tea. She made very good tea as well.
What was her name?
Nora Annabelle. She was born Nora Hunter in Ontario, so that was a big family as well.
Well, that was very interesting. I can picture the things. I was picturing the children scattering, with the woman coming, the welfare woman coming to take them.
Yeah, they loved their mother. They were wonderful parents, and they would get a fever if they were away from her for too long. They would get themselves also worked up.
And so in meeting her, is there anything that she directly told you that you particularly remember?
No, I just vaguely remember being inside her little trailer, and she had made tea for me. So like I was only around, 2 or 3.
Oh.
So it was very But like I say, I feel like she's around me all the time, and I carry that, that strength. So, I just feel everybody's got a little bit of her in them, that strength to, keep going and just manage, micromanage all these children and duties. And even before grandfather died, she had all of that to do as well. And then afterwards, and she had to keep going, And grandfather was in the hospital when one of the children died, and he didn't know until 6 weeks after. So she carried that by herself as well until he came out of the coma. Those are kind of little bullet points of things that she's overcome and never was able to stop, But she adored her kids. And that's one thing that I would like. I really notice when people adore their children. You know, they just make sure that they come first.
Yeah, so I think this would be an enjoyable story, and then maybe thinking of things like sounds, like a car horn and other things that could, highlight or go its background at different parts of the story.
Yes, it's like I say, it's not a story yet. It was just today. It was a show and tell, and so that's why bullet points, because it has to really condense it, right?
Yes. Well, I took a class over the weekend. It was called Media Magic. And that was one of the first things they had on the thing, and talking about making a video, how people could make videos from their stories. And they said, use bullet points, don't use the script. When people use a script, they get confused about the script. They worry about the script. They have to keep cutting and going over and over. But when you have your bullet points, you say it more naturally, and you don't worry about every little word, but it comes across, it communicates, and it's more interesting.
Yeah, and you have to go with, the environment that you're in, and the scene and the people around, and part of it is winging it, like the bullet points are there, but if somebody wants to jump in and elaborate with you on something or for themselves, there's room for that,
Well, that brings me to a point of saying, if you're listening to the podcast and you are also interested in being able to tell stories, things of pain, pleasure, accomplishment, things that you remember and want to anchor down for other people, join our podcast. We have it every Thursday at 1:00. If you would like to. Sometimes people just are on and they're silent. Other times people give their opinions about topics we're talking about, or they ask questions about stories people tell. So you can contact me at pbaafc@gmail.com. That stands for Powered by Age. We're working toward, our goal is creating an age-friendly city. People who've joined the podcast, one of the things that we ask is not just identifying things that are wrong, but what are you able to and willing to contribute? So we have had many people who were activists in different things that have shared what they did about housing rights, shared what they were involved with within the schools, shared what they've involved with dealing with gender issues and laws that penalized people or didn't allow same-sex marriage or didn't allow interracial marriage. So there have been a lot of topics that we've talked about. There's still many to go. We haven't come to a finished solution about anything, but we definitely have covered and are welcoming more people to get involved in the podcast. We do make an effort when, like with June, it was a special month for Indigenous people. We're going to be talking next month about International Refugees Day. It includes Father's Day, and it includes Pride Month. So at each of those times, we invite members of our group or guests that they invite or know to come in and talk about or do a special presentation. So it's an organic living thing. So we invite you to join PBA Powered by Age, and to tell a friend if you liked it, or contact us if you too would like to become a part. So I'm Charlotte Farrell, your host, and look forward to, we can see each other through Zoom, but if you're listening, you won't see us, but you'll be able to hear us. So thank you for listening today, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you.